in Oaxaca, Mexico. As I was growing up, my grandmother told me that in that way I would be linked to the Mother Earth and to my homeland for the rest of my life. And at one point I had to go back there to complete my life cycle. For us, as indigenous peoples, land is not only our territory, it is the place where we cultivate our life, our identity, our maize and native seeds. When I told my grandmother that I was moving to the Netherlands, she was all shocked and nervous and worried, and she said, "How are you gonna survive in this other world without our maize?" I would say that usually when we are addressing problems such as food security, climate change, we think of global solutions, but we could start local, respecting aspirations of people, their rights, their identity, their culture, if we really want to be effective as researchers. We want a world where many other worlds fit.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.
Welcome, everyone, to the Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. We're thrilled to have you join us today as we spotlight incredible women leading transformative change in science. This seminar is in English with interpretation available in Spanish, French, and Hindi. And don't forget to follow the conversation across social media with the hashtag Women in Science. We invite you to share your questions and comments on Slido for our Q&A session after the presentation and discussion with our inspiring speaker. Today, we're honored to hear from Dr. Tania Martinez, a researcher with more than 15 years of experience driving food and water sovereignty for Indigenous peoples. She is passionate advocate for Indigenous women's education and STEM, supporting initiatives like school meals, agroecology, and native seeds. She'll be joined in conversation by Dr. Katharina Schiller, a CIMMYT scientist advancing sustainable agri-food innovations and systemic transitions through participatory approaches. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bram Govertz, Director General of CIMMYT, to officially open today's event and introduce our distinguished speakers. Dr. Govertz, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Daniela, and thanks also to see. It's great to see Tania here on screen. Good day, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending on where you are connecting from to this Women Leaders in Science seminar. Yes, it is again this day of the week, or this day of every 2 weeks, rather, in which we have a TED Talk meets fireside chat style series conversation on women leaders. And we started this series now several months ago, more than a year ago, to achieve the goal of broader representation and gender balance in science. We need to provide more opportunities to hear from women leaders, their life journeys, their lessons and insights, but also how gender goes beyond women and men, but can include Indigenous people, can include visions from tradition up to the science. And it's therefore that we're honored to have Tania Martinez here as our 33rd Catalyst of Change speaker. Many of you know Tania, as she has been working with CIMMYT, but she's a distinguished Indigenous interdisciplinary researcher from Oaxaca. She has dedicated her career to advocating for Indigenous rights, for sustainability, and for social justice. She's currently serving at the Food and Water Sovereignty Program Director at Land is Life, an Indigenous-led coalition, and she's also a research associate at University Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo. And then additionally, she serves as a technical expert on the water energy nexus for the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Water, and is a scientific advisor to the FAO's Global Important Agriculture Heritage Systems Program. But most and foremost, Tania is a good friend and a distinguished scientist that brought into CIMMYT already new thinking. So I am convinced she will do that again today. And she will do it even more efficient by a conversation with Katharina Schiller, who is a scaling and sustainability transition scientist at CIMMYT's SAS program. I am sure that you will enjoy and learn a lot from Tania's outstanding leadership experience, and you will enjoy the conversation between those two extraordinary women that we will listen to today. Tania, I will not say more, just over to you.
Thank you very much, Ram. When I was talking about this event, I was mentioning it feels so nice to be back home because I consider CIMMYT like a second home. And you will learn why I mentioned CIMMYT as a second home as my presentation unfolds. So let me share my screen. I think, just hold on. Can you see my screen now? Okay, let me do this again because I think I did something wrong.
Now we can see it.
Okay, now it should be working. Okay. So I feel like if I go back to tell you that I was born in Oaxaca, it's a bit repetitive. So I think I'm going to skip just that part because you have heard that already from some of the conversation. But what I have to say, and I think many other women that have presented before me, they highlight the role of many other women that came before us. For me, talking about my story is also sharing about my family's journey. And let me start with the story of my grandparents. I speak about Indigenous peoples' issues because we survived colonization and assimilation processes, and my family sought refuge in the mountains of Oaxaca. My grandmother, Eulalia, who was an important person, you saw it in the intro too. She taught me how to crop the land, but also how to connect with my identity. She was denied the right to whole land as she was a woman, but also she never spoke Spanish nor went to school. But she had a lot of knowledge that she passed on me and to other generations that make us still be connected to our land. When I also talk about who Tania is, I also have to refer to my mom, Sylvia, who is an Indigenous woman who left the Mije region as a child to Mexico City, propelled by poverty, but also thinking and dreaming she could have a different future. She started her journey as a maid, but she persevered to complete her education and become one of the first Indigenous teachers that advocated for intercultural education, upholding our right to self-determination in a landscape that sought to erase our identity. As a child, I think one of my greatest memories is accompanying her in many of her journeys. Many times we had to walk under the rain to many of the communities because that was the way they had to work. Sometimes we were lucky to have radio, and now that I go sometimes to some communities or areas where we don't have access to internet, I think back in time and laugh how I feel my life so limited when I don't have a mobile phone or access to internet. Okay, let me see. Okay, so if I had to summarize my life, I would tell you that it has been a life of encounters and disencounters, and that I think those are two of my favorite words. Because the first disencounter for me came when I felt that I was different at the age of 5 in 1992. My parents moved to Mexico City to study and become teachers. And there I realized for the first time I was Indigenous. This identity felt like a label of inferiority. I started to struggle because I had a limited Spanish, but also I had a skin. The color of my skin made me feel that Indigenous wasn't, or being Indigenous wasn't so good. At the same time, I continued being impressed by the different things that we had in the city, how you could, for example, open the tap and just have access to water. And also it made me reflect on what were the other things that we lacked in my community. At that point, I think it was emerging an engineer. I vividly remember some of the mornings in one of the communities that my parents used to work. One of my tasks in the morning was to go to the river to fetch water, 1 liter. I was 5 years old while my mom made breakfast. The journey downhill was enjoyable. I enjoyed picking berries, but as I had to come back, I would be so exhausted and I would say I had to walk for an hour. Now that I work with the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to water, I have learned that if you walk more than 30 minutes or 5 kilometers, your right to water is being violated. I tease my parents and they say I'm making an overstatement because I only had to walk 20 minutes, but for me, it felt like it was forever. That experience profoundly influenced me and in a way marked what I wanted to do in the future. In 1996, after my parents had completed their education, we returned to my hometown. And even though the time in the city had forced me to struggle with my indigenous identity, which I began honestly to see as a disadvantage, I questioned the value and I wonder if people is going to discriminate me because I'm an indigenous person. Why should I keep embracing that identity? Thankfully, my grandmother Eulalia helped me to reconnect with my roots and made me the proud woman I am today. In 2001, with no high school in my community and the dreams of becoming an engineer, at the age of 14, I applied to Chapingo Autonomous University, which is pretty close to CIMI, and I earned a spot in the high school program with a scholarship, which made my journey easy, and I had to move near Mexico City. While they didn't offer sanitary engineering or civil engineering, they had a degree in irrigation, which aligned pretty close to the goals I had. During that time, I learned that if you wanted to like pursuing a master's or a PhD abroad, could help you also to increase your career or improve your career, but that the school was a mean to open many other doors. So I had a perfect plan. I wanted to go to the Netherlands to study my master's in sanitary engineering, because who else if not the Dutch to study water management? Life, however, has its twists, and after completing my bachelor's, I got a job in an irrigation company. Of course, I needed the money. I didn't have a scholarship anymore, but also I felt that I was being separated from the dreams I had of becoming a sanitary engineer. So I decided to leave my job and to pursue a scholarship to do my master's studies in the Netherlands. However, one of the requirements for my bachelor's was also to finish a bachelor thesis. So I focused on these two things. One of the advantages I had, because we are talking about women and how we can empower women. I think one of the main people that shaped my life at this stage was my bachelor supervisor. She was a great mentor. I didn't have access to internet, for example, and she would lend me the keys of her office, and I would spend hours and hours just working in her office. She would also take me home to make sure I was safe at the end of the day, and I didn't run any risks. So at this stage, I was focusing on characterizing sulfate reducing bacteria and also exploring solarization and radiation methods to process sludge, and reuse it in agriculture. I dreamed of discovering a unique bacteria that could help processing waste, but it didn't happen. Then life is just funny in the sense that you dream, but it also leads you to many other paths. This year, when I was at Chapingo, I missed many scholarship opportunities because for the first time, my university had many strikes. And at one point, I was a bit disappointed and I felt like I was not going to achieve my dream of studying abroad, but I ran into a call of the Fulbright Fellowship. I only had 3 months to prepare before the deadline, and despite the initial funding, I felt like I wanted to apply. The application required something that is called a GRE test. So I spent my last savings to book that test. But sadly, again, the influence of a pandemic, the H1N1, affected and delayed my exam so many times. So I managed to have the test before the deadline. However, I couldn't prove that I had passed the test. I submitted my application with a letter explaining all the journey I had to apply for that test. The response of the commission, of the Fulbright Commission in Mexico was, "We are sorry, but thank you. Try next time." Some weeks later, I got a call from the Fulbright Commission saying that if I had passed the exam, they were willing to give me an interview. After that interview, I became the first Indigenous person to get a Fulbright scholarship in Mexico. This was important. I'm talking about 2009, and just to give you a bit more context, in 2007, for the first time, the UN had ratified a Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. an issue that was relevant at that point. So I was so happy, and while I was waiting to move to the US to do my master's, I continued working in an irrigation technology transfer project in Mexico, questioning why agricultural policies focused mainly on larger scale farmers. This experience, in a way, initiated my journey into social science, but I didn't know it that yet. So once I was at University of Arizona, I did my master's in agricultural and biosystems engineering. I researched the effect of water stress on different sorghum varieties, but also engaged in crop modeling and optimizing planting dates for biofuel production. This was a key topic in 2008 because it was the boom of biofuels in the US. During my first semester, one weekend, my supervisor invited me to come to his office. I have to say that I was a bit scared. I thought, because English wasn't my first language and I felt so scared about interacting in that new language, that he might point out something I had done wrong. But I found myself to being offered the chance to transition into a PhD, a decision that could lead to complete a PhD at the age of 25. This opportunity, even though it was exciting, it also made me think if that was what I really wanted to do. At the conclusion of my master's, I had the opportunity to visit Thailand, and I met with someone from the Peace Corps who profoundly influenced my career. He advised me to return to Mexico. He told me, "Don't rush. You are young. Why you want to rush so much?" And I took his advice. I returned to Mexico. I told my supervisor that I would suspend my PhD for a year and then see if that's what I wanted. While I was in Arizona, some of my closest friends were anthropologists, artists, and linguists, but also I had been close to the experiences of people or indigenous peoples living within two countries, the transnational indigenous peoples, and that also made me question why this dynamic happens. So, and this is my encounter with CIMMYT. Before going to Mexico, I had applied for a job at CIMMYT that I did not get. However, this interaction introduced me to the organization's work, but also led me to a significant connection with Dr. Bram, who later offered me a consultancy. Even though when I remember when we met, he asked me what is that I wanted to do. And we knew that I was working on water management, but he asked me if I could collaborate temporarily with an information and communication technology development project that I think still is called Masagro Mobile. And I said yes. Actually, I think that was the best decision because it allowed me to visit many hubs in Mexico in 2012, but also exposed me to many realities that I did ignore back then. So here, the social scientist that you see, the social science person that you see today sort of was born. While I was doing my field work and I saw this researcher now joining, Urs, joining the Zoom, I received the news of a scholarship for my PhD. And I was with Urs and Filipa Zamora in Chiapas. I remember Urs was so helpful to offer me or share some contacts or potential avenues for my PhD. He invited me to a seminar with Connie Almekinders from Wageningen University when we were back at CIMMYT HQ. When I met Connie, then I was convinced that I wanted to do a PhD with her. But also I was so happy that CIMMYT allowed me to continue doing my research with them. So these experiences allowed me to work with mainly two programs, which was then socioeconomics and conservation agriculture, guided by mentors like Dr. Bram and Carolina Camacho, who were instrumental in connecting me with other professionals. When I reflect on this period of my life, and I think I always say this, I consider CIMMYT my best practical school because I always had this supportive environment. I was enriched by my mentors. I was always allowed and had the freedom to explore all the different avenues I had, but I also was always welcomed by farmers, indigenous peoples, technicians, and researchers all the world that, in a way, CIMMYT offered me a different world. I developed my abilities as a facilitator and a social inclusion specialist. Even though sometimes my thinking would be critical, I always felt thankful that CIMMYT would allow me to go into those critical paths. Also, I have to say that CIMMYT partially funded my PhD, showcasing its commitment to or with younger scientists. I'm really thankful for that opportunity, but I also hope that CIMMYT continues to do this with other scientists, not only me. In 2016, I was honored to receive the National Youth Prize, which was a recognition to my commitment, my social commitment, but also my academic trajectory. This was a new avenue that put me into the world of advocacy and becoming my role as an activist. Also took me to other spaces like the UN, attending, for example, a first meeting at FAO that pushed me to explore other avenues. For example, in 2020, I accepted a postdoctoral position at the University of Greenwich to focus on intercultural models to improve nutrition and health for indigenous peoples through gender-sensitive approaches in Peru. We are talking of a time where we had COVID. I successfully reorganized and negotiated research priorities with my collaborators, but also this experience made me reflect on how we can have the best research practices when we engage with knowledge and right holders, but also how is that we can empower communities so they can develop the research that they need, but also how they can have a seat at the table when we are negotiating complex things such as food sovereignty. In 2020, I was invited to contribute to the United Nations Food System Summit, advocating for the meaningful participation of indigenous peoples, but also ensuring that their perspectives were included. For example, one of the milestones at this stage was that the UN Deputy Secretary Amina Mohammed publicly acknowledged the vital role of indigenous peoples in addressing food security. This was the first time that a UN person at high level would recognize this. In 2021, we managed to get a coalition on indigenous peoples' food systems, the first one, and which was one of the outcomes of the United Nations Food System Summit. I also was invited to join FAO to co-facilitate the secretariat of this coalition. And that also helped me to engage with indigenous organizations around the world. Understanding different priorities, and as many of you know, working at CIMMYT, that one size does not fit all, but that we need to create solutions that fit different realities. This was just the beginning of a different path in my life. Then I engaged in other processes like the Water Action Decade and the UN Water Conference in 2023, using my science, my knowledge to advocate for the meaningful participation of indigenous peoples. Something that is really important is that I have always remained committed to my community, respecting our right to self-determination. In 2020, I was honored to receive a wooden cane that probably many of you, if you live in Mexico, have seen, that symbolizes some sort of commitment and appointments by indigenous communities. I served in the Women's Office for a year to support the welfare of women, but also since then I've been supporting different initiatives in my community. For me, being part of a community is important because also at international level, I reflected on how privileged I am to preserve my language, to be able to come back to my homeland, to wear my traditional dress, but also to have still something called a community. So my work with the UN has also made me reflect on how we engage with indigenous peoples. Since 2023, I wanted to learn more about rights. So I was invited by the UN Special Rapporteur to work with him. Also, since this year, I've been collaborating with Land is Life, which is a coalition of indigenous peoples. We have many programs, and we believe that empowering women is one of the main ways to support communities. I'm just listing some of the programs that we have. I will not go into detail, but if you have more questions, I invite you to check our website. Okay, let me see. Okay, so also this year, because we are talking about many spaces that we have to enter as women, I became probably the youngest, one of the youngest persons, but also the first indigenous scientist from the globally important agricultural heritage systems, scientific advisor at FAO, which makes me happy, but also it brings with a lot of it brings a lot of responsibility. As I continue developing my career, I continue to run into people from CIMMYT. The farmer you see there, I was visiting him at the beginning of this year, and he told me he was a collaborator of CIMMYT. So CIMMYT keeps on coming back to my life quite often. So just like 3 final comments to finalize. As scientists, I think we can build inclusive societies. And I think we can do that by focusing on people. I work with indigenous peoples, and we say that we safeguard 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, yet many indigenous activists are killed in the name of development, but many policies continue to violate our rights. Working in the food space, when I tell you that we can build inclusive policies, I invite you to read this report that we can learn from experiences like Brazil's school meal programs that supports indigenous peoples, puts the right to food by asking them to help designing menus, but also, as I know Masagro does, for example, and other of the initiatives that you have at CIMMYT, supporting small farmers or supporting indigenous peoples to improve their systems, respecting what they already have, but also making them more efficient. Reducing food waste as you reduce the food value chain, but also that means reducing problems of transportation or storage and reducing the impact on climate change. In a world where we say that 30% of the food is wasted and that the dominant food systems have an issue, there are many solutions that we can learn, that we can take, many lessons that we can learn from indigenous peoples, because they can offer game-changing solutions. As I explained with my journey, education has had a profound effect in my career. And I believe that if we want to improve communities, we need to invest in education. We need to support the education of indigenous women, of indigenous researchers, or other groups that are put in marginalization. So we all need a community. So I advise younger women that you should surround yourself with friends and learn to network. I keep on running, like I said, into CIMMYT people. Even when I met the Pope, I saw many of the colleagues from the CIMMYT circle when I go to different events. And finally, when we think of success, many times we think that success, it's just like a continuous line with a positive slope, but that is not true. It's actually messy. And sometimes we can think that we are not going on the right direction. I sometimes think what would have happened if I would have taken this PhD at 25. But at the same time, I think that all the enjoyment that came to the path has been positive, and I feel happy that it unfolded in that way. So this is it that I have to say for today. And sorry, I think I was a bit nervous at the beginning, but I hope you managed to get my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tania. Dr. Caterina, Tania, the floor is yours.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Katarina Schiller. Tania, thank you so much for this inspiring and reflective presentation. And I am very excited to be able to ask you some questions, some follow-up questions today. So everyone, hi, my name is Katarina Schiller, and as Dr. Bram introduced me, I'm a scientist working on the scaling of innovations and transitions to more sustainable agri-food systems and sustainable agri-food systems program. And I wanted to interview Tania because she is not just a professional inspiration, but also a personal friend, since we did our PhDs together at Wageningen University. And Tania, just starting off, you have worked in so many different contexts and organizations, and it seems that, I mean, I think that you walk between many worlds, right? As a you started out as a technical scientist, and you have this move to be a social scientist. You explained, your trajectory. It's in my life, it's also, I've struggled, or I've found it challenging to go between my personal, where I come from, and then the international challenges that we work with as an international scientist. And you go between all of these different worlds. How do you navigate this, and what do you think we can learn from this in a many world sense?
So I think I didn't mention this, but I think when we finish our PhDs, we are asked to have something that is called propositions. And one of my propositions was about navigating different worlds. It's like dating many people at the same time. I haven't done that yet, but I guess that when you want to satisfy all the different worlds, you have to learn that you might disappoint some of them. But at the same time, as you navigate these different worlds, I was mentioning the role of community. I think I was so lucky to have people that helped me along the way. Like, for example, when I was mentioning indigenous organizations, for example, at one point were telling me, you are a great scientist, but you have no idea about human rights. And you have to take that, not as a criticism, but more what I need to learn, but also showing some of these potential mentors that you are willing to learn. If you don't want to, it's also okay. There's people that decides not to, and they stick to one field. But in my case, it was important for the work I was doing, that they also became key people that has supported my trajectory. Going back to CIMMYT, I remember that I wanted initially, when I joined CIMMYT, to come to the socioeconomics program, but I was an engineer. So I knew if I came to the socioeconomic programs, that wouldn't be easy. And Ram opened the door so I could come in. But at the same time, just meeting people in the field just offered me many opportunities to work. I think I've been blessed to have many good mentors in many ways, and that has made the journey easy in a way. I can speak about my experience, but also speaking from, there are not many indigenous scientists, but I also have witnessed how some other people didn't have the same path when they tell you that they had to face more challenges. But I had to say that I was lucky enough to find mentors in that journey.
Well, I mean, listening to your story, it seems to me that you have also faced many challenges and surmounted them. And I'm very glad that you have had these mentors along the way to help you navigate that path. And you've surely, in many occasions, been just of a few women. And like you said, just there are not that many indigenous scientists working also on this kind of topics that you work at. So surely, in these situations when you're just one of a few women, or maybe particularly indigenous women, maybe the only indigenous woman in a meeting room or in a conference room, how do you ensure that you are heard when there are many other strong personalities in the room?
I think confidence is something you develop with time. And I still have like this imposter syndrome. Like, for example, in one of my recent meetings, I was told many times, we are so happy to have you here. The first time it was okay. The second time it was okay. And the third time I wonder why. And at the same time, I was like, okay, you could see it like in two ways. Either you take it as condescendence, right? But also you could see it as an opportunity to make good contributions. And there's a cartoon that says, like, you might fear doing many things, but even if you fear doing many things, make the fear one of your closest friends and still do it. And I think that's one of the approaches I have taken. I mention again that role of mentors. When I'm not sure about something, I always go back to people that reassures me or shows me the path. Now that, for example, I have to make presentations, now that I had to make a presentation in 20 minutes, I struggle a lot because first I was navigating the world in academia where you have like a lot of time to make presentations. But then I moved into the advocacy world where you have just 3 minutes or 5 minutes to make your points. And so I've been, like I said, lucky enough to have mentors along the way, and mentors of all the types, from scientists to grassroots leaders. Even in my community, when I have to do community service and follow some of the rules internally, I have to go back to my mom because she's the one that will guide me on how to navigate that world. So I would say, yes, sometimes being the only one, the first one, or the different one, like a unicorn, could be challenging, but surround yourself with people and they would help you to navigate that world.
Mm-hmm. And I think this also segues into the next question that I had for you, which is, what advice would you give to women who lack confidence to take on leadership roles? How can we, I mean, you already mentioned imposter system. I mentioned that I also still have this. And now you and I, as, you know, mid-career women who love what we do and who have a large dedication to what we do, how can we overcome feelings of inadequacy? How would you discuss that with younger women who are coming up right now?
I think it's important. So I believe so much in the networks and social capital, in a way, social ties, because that helps you to grow a lot. Let me just give you an example. The Fulbright fellowship that I got, at least in Mexico, is generally given to people that it's coming from a high income. So I was super insecure when I had to go to some of these spaces. But I remember, for example, telling Carolina Camacho to come with me because I didn't want to go alone to this space. And then she would help me and like give me some sort of mentorship. I could mention Matthew Reynolds, who doesn't have to do anything with what I do these days, but also he became like an excellent mentor at CIMIT. I would say build a strong network, embrace who you are. Like I said, if you fear many things, still do it, and you will learn as time passes. I was just looking at that presentation that we had at the beginning of this session, and I was super nervous when I was presenting in that video in Bonn. I think it was in 2019. That was one of my first presentations, and I feared many things, especially criticism, not only from a scientific point of view, but also from the activist world. And rather than taking criticism in a negative way, because we could see things in black or white, I would always say, try to take the positive and just move on. But also think that your path is unique and that no one has a right to judge it, because no one really knows what it has taken for you to be there. We all have a unique personal journey. And sometimes I feel that we don't value our journeys enough. And I love self-reflections because I think they allow you to value where you're coming from and where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that advice and the tips you have based on your experiences. I can only wholeheartedly support everything you say. And one last question from me before we turn over to the audience for questions. But what advice would you give to CIMIT to help grow and support its women leaders? What do you think CIMIT can do?
Well, I can speak of myself coming as I was pretty young when I came. So I would say, CIMIT, please continue investing in young researchers. I think they had a program at one point where they were supporting people that was supporting them in the field. For example, I think I can mention Carolina Rivera as one of the young scientists that you have. I would say keep on investing on education for women, but also I don't know how it would be to be staff at CIMIT, because I was a consultant and I always had like this relationship. I call it like we were boyfriends and girlfriends, because I was a PhD, so I had a lot of freedom in that sense too. But be open to learn, and I think that's, I would say, based on my experience with Masagro and what I presented, reflecting with Bram and working with Carolina, there was always this willingness to learn. But don't lose the opportunity to reflect collectively, to hear older scientists, but also to think how you can support younger scientists, which can be capacity development, creating, I don't know, joint programs so they can turn into scientists if you have technicians or bachelor students. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Catarina, for this inspiring conversation with Dr. Tania. Now we're opening the floor to your questions. Feel free to raise your hand, turn on your camera, or drop your questions into Slido. I believe we have some questions already to you, Dr. Tania. The first one would be, what inspires you the most about your work today?
What inspires me the most about my work? I think many things, but one of them, I love working with younger generations. And like I said, sometimes when I think of all the twists that my career has had, I have to remind myself that there was a reason for that journey, but also I want to believe that I'm impacting younger generation of women. And that's one of the reasons why I support or fundraise for Indigenous girls or support women in STEM careers. Because I think if we want to make changes, I'm a dreamer, I'm an idealist. We need to continue building social ties and networks. And I think when I run into someone on the street now that I go back sometimes to Chipingo or in some spaces and I can mentor some other women or they tell me thank you because we learned this from you or we did this because of you, I think that just gives me a satisfaction in a way.
Thank you very much for sharing. Our next question is, often our idealism as young, passionate scientists can be challenged because changing systems is much harder to do than maybe we thought it was. How do you manage the realities of power working against forces for change and equity?
And that's a good question. I think being an idealist also comes with a lot of frustration. Something I have learned is I would say sometimes also it's good to know that you have to leave when a space is not good for you. And you can try your best to make changes. Again, I will talk about building connection, ties, learn to be a diplomat. Sometimes there's people that take different approaches. I think I will go generally with being a diplomat because sometimes it helps you to achieve more. But also I can understand that you have to learn that sometimes you cannot make the changes you want. And I think that's when probably you have to leave. Yeah, I would say it's a reality sometimes. And I think it depends also about the goals that you have and what you're pursuing. I think something I learned over the time was also to leave when I felt I had to leave some spaces and just pursue something different or trying to achieve the same thing I wanted, but choosing a different path. There are many ways to achieve things, and sometimes we just have to diversify the ways to get there.
Thank you, Tania. Another question is, what are you most proud of in your journey?
Wow. I still think that I would say that Fulbright Fellowship, I didn't think back, I didn't think of it as something big when I was younger. But like I said, just this idea of for example, a UN declaration drafted in 2007 for Indigenous people's rights. When I got that scholarship, there were no quotas for Indigenous people. So that's why it became sort of unique, showing that with your story, with your trajectory, with your work, you could also make room for other people. And yeah, I think that's probably one of the things I'm the most proud about. But also thinking that made me reflect on many of the privileges I had. And I think I was mentioning, when I see many people that is being displaced, when I see many people that cannot go back to their hometowns, when I see many people that wasn't able to retain their languages or the traditional clothes or a deep connection that I have with my land, I just feel I'm so blessed. So that's what I think. Education and that scholarship has been one of the things that I'm the most proud about, because I think we can make a different world, but we have to help designing that world.
Sure. We have more questions coming in. Thank you for sharing your story. How do you think that CMATE can better support young scientists in professional development?
Uh, I would say when I was at CMIT, I think I was also quite young. I was 25. Um, and I remember many youngsters in the corridors. I've been happy to see that many of them also have moved their careers to a different stage. But I think just being flexible or creating a workspace where they can develop other skills. If they want to become scientists, maybe enabling them to become scientists. Prioritizing also, because I think prioritizing also diversity. Some people might be against the quotas. I'm not against the quotas, because I think diversity also enriches a space and environment and perspectives. And I think that would be my advice to teammates. Keep on supporting younger generation of scientists, the youngsters that you have. I know that CIMIT has a strong reputation. Like I said, I went to Wageningen just through Urs, who is, I think, in this seminar today, but also attending a seminar at CIMIT, enabling spaces where younger generations can connect with people that has more experience, so they can also motivate and mentorship the younger scientists or people that you have at CIMIT.
I love it. Thank you very much. What are you most hopeful about for the future of your work?
Well, that's a challenging question, because I think at this stage I decided to take the path of human rights, but also I'm trying to combine this with science, which is not an easy path. Because sometimes you're either considered an activist or a scientist, and people generally tells me, I was coming back to the analogy of wearing different hats and having multiple relationships at the same time. The activists tell me, Tania, you don't know enough about human rights, but also scientists tell me you are not doing science anymore, or what you do is not science anymore. But I still think that I will find a place where I can combine all the passions of my life. Most likely that would be academia. And that's something that I'm still trying to find. I'm still trying to find my place. I'm still exploring many of the passions I have, but we will see.
Thank you, Tania. We have a question in the chat, and it says, some people forget the roots and the struggles of their journey once they achieve success, often repeating the injustices they once endured while rising from the bottom. What are your thoughts or message on this?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think on a personal level, I have said that I have had great mentors, but I also have run into spaces where we have to compete. And I said we have to, like, for example, in one UN meeting during the water process, there was another indigenous scientist, and she was quite aggressive to me. And my first impression was to respond with anger, but then it was like, why, instead of responding with anger, do we think of what this person has gone through? So after a conversation, I think I understood where she was coming from, but also that I don't think she had as many good mentors as I did. And then I just told her that it wasn't about being the first one or the only one, but more that about if people wasn't so nice to us along the journey, how we could change these experiences so others do not have the same bad experience. I think it's not easy because of course we all want to succeed. We all have dreams and aspirations and ambitions. I'm not gonna say I don't. But we have to balance and continue reflecting critically on why we are there, how we got there, and what is the change we want to make. Um, yeah, I think these reflections come with time, but yeah, I know what you mean. I haven't had many experiences like that, and the times I have had them, I try to also talk to people.
Thank you, Dr. Tania. We have two more questions. Being a diplomat can entail expressing disagreement with people. How do you do that diplomatically?
That's a good question. I think sometimes you have to show with examples. Let me just take you back to when I was doing my postdoc at Peru. Eh, I was treated as the junior scientist in the team, and I had issues with one of the researchers a lot because he was so. We had like different disciplines for this research project, and every researcher wanted to prioritize their agendas. At one point, we had to come together and realize that yes, all the agendas and priorities were important. Um, it was a bit frustrating, but I think in the end, showing specifically with key facts, with key elements, why this was important, changed the dynamic in the team. If it comes to working with indigenous organizations in the UN system, I have seen a lot of disagreement many times. And I think I've been trying to be more like a broker, understanding each one or each party's perspective, but also trying to bring consensus. It's probably not something easy to do, and you develop those skills with time. Even just to give a negative, not a negative, but how would we say that, or how do we frame that? To tell someone you need to do things differently because the way you're doing things could be improved, you have to frame it with a positive message. But that also takes time, and you have to develop those skills, and you learn by practice. Sometimes you probably were not so assertive when you said it the first time. The second time you will do it better, and then you will improve as you go along the way.
Sure, practice makes perfect, right? And the last question is, what words of wisdom could you share with young and mid-career women professionals who might be struggling with obstacles right now?
I will come to the point that I'm an idealist. Embrace your dreams. When sometimes the path looks a bit messy, I tell younger generations to convince yourselves that there was a reason why you choose something. Even if it's not true, just convince yourself that there was a reason. And that everything that you have learned along the way, even the bad experiences or the things that you think of them as bad experiences, that you learn from them. At least you know what not to do the next time and how to do it in a different way. Also, learn to network. I always say, and probably Dr. Brown remembers that. I remember something that he used to tell me. I knew you had talent, but I just didn't know how to help you to develop it because I think I was too much of an introvert person. So I had to move into the extrovert side to explore many of the paths, but also to learn that I needed other people and a community if I wanted to grow. So this would be my advice to you. Embrace your dreams, value your path. No one has a right to scrutinize it because you are the only one that knows what it has entailed to be where you are. put your fears aside, or even if you fear many things, work with them, but also create a community around you, because the community will be something that keeps you moving and that holds you when things are sometimes feeling like they fall apart.
I love it. Thank you very much. And as we wrap up, a heartfelt thank you to you, Dr. Tania, for sharing your extraordinary journey and insights. Your work is truly inspiring. And on behalf of Dr. Bram Govertz and Simit, thank you to everyone for being here today. Stay tuned for our next Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar in 2 weeks. We hope to see you there. Have a wonderful day or evening, and thank you for being part of this journey.
El mundo está ya en la era de la inteligencia artificial y por tanto todos debemos dar pasos hacia la agricultura 4.0. Es definitivamente lo que nos va a permitir llegar a recuperar la agricultura con la misma tierra, reduciendo los inputs y recuperar el rendimiento hacia niveles que se incrementen hasta el 60% para ser capaces de en 50 años alimentar a nuestra población mundial.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.